We are going to the Super Bowl. This is the Super Bowl of creativity as far as I'm concerned. What is possible when you nurture the creativity of the people around you? What happens in your community? What happens in your city? What happens in your family and in your life? Everyone is creative. Everyone is welcome. Welcome to Creative Mornings, Charlotte. Thank you for being here.
Come on, y'all. You got to believe in yourself. Yeah. Come on, help me clap. You got to push your way to your heart. You got to believe in yourself. Yeah. You got to push your way to your soul.
Let's see if this works. Hey! If we were ever going to do a cash-blowing machine, it was going to be when we're talking about ethics, right? Because somehow money and ethics got all tangled up, and no one's been able to untangle them yet. What do you do?
I am your personal journey and life coach.
Nice.
And I help awaken your brilliance.
What do you do?
All right, I'm Lauren. We should get to know each other. I am a burgeoning life coach as well. Building my business.
Nice. Awesome. Great. And for our third life coach,
I am kind of a life coach. I sell liquor for a living. So if whatever they're doing doesn't work, then you come to me.
right. Here we go. 1, 2, 3. Let's see if this works. All right, here we go. 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 She's going for the ceiling. She is. She's going for the ceiling. Go. They're all going for the ceiling. They've all figured out the trick. Go. Go. Get it. The rest is yours. Oh! Oh! Here we go. Yes! Go. I am not counting this money. So we're going to talk about ethics today. This theme was actually chosen by our Madrid chapter. And it's a really interesting conversation to be in, right? Especially those of us who are running our own businesses, we're working with clients. You know, ethics is a part of our daily life, and there's so many ways that we could approach it, and I'm really excited about Josh's approach. Thanks, man.
I'll just keep that money. Smitty, thank you. Smitty's playing a little bit of the Temptations for me. Is that not Ball of Confusion? Okay, that's from the Psychedelic Soul album, so good. Thank you. Ethics. Ethics is a huge topic. So ethics has nothing more and nothing less to do than with our habits and behaviors. Ethics is what we do. We can have bad ethics, we can have good ethics. But all that we do is ethics. So real quick, a full disclosure for this talk, I borrowed heavily from the thinking of Stanley Hauerwas and Ken Wilber and Scott McCloud. Each of these guys would hate the other two, but I think that their thoughts overlap in some really interesting ways. Now, because all good ethics ought to have rabbits in it, we should understand what a warren is. A warren is the interconnected burrows that rabbits make and live in. Why rabbits? Because Watership Down, that's why. In case you aren't familiar with the novel and the movie, Watership Down is a story of a group of rabbits that flee their warren to search for a new life. It's a classic Exodus story, and I highly recommend it to you. Among the rabbits that leave their home, there's one of them that is able to sense the near future. His name is Fiver. It might be better said that Fiver can read the present better than anybody else. He knows that he must leave his home warren because of an impending danger. He does leave, and his brother comes along with him and a few extra others. And it turns out that indeed their warren will be destroyed by a housing development. Now, this story This story is completely fantastical and has no grounding in reality at all. A series of adventures follow. At one point in the story, the rabbits of Watership Down happen upon a utopian warren of rabbits. Here, the rabbits are very well fed. There's all kinds of vegetables around, which they're not used to. Indeed, the food is thrown to them by an anonymous human. And as the rabbits of Watership Down become comfortable and are shown hospitality in this new warren, the time comes for them to share their stories, as is their custom. One of the rabbits tells an old and sacred tale that celebrates the best virtues of rabbits, namely guile and trickery. This story, though, is received coolly by the rabbits in this other warren, and they think that the ones who are telling it are naive and quaint. And then the utopian rabbits tell their story, which is a poetry of the airiest variety. The poem ultimately means nothing at all. And then Fiverr, the prophet seer, then convinces the others that they need to leave the utopia right away, which they do, and they soon find out that the human farmer that has been throwing out the food has domesticated these rabbits, feeding them and occasionally snaring one or the other, but not killing enough of them to scare them off. These rabbits, who seem to have a perfect life, are merely the residents of a sophisticated farm, and they are the crop. The hint that something was wrong with these rabbits is that they had no stories of substance, just groundless, boring words strung together. The stories that we tell demonstrate the ethics that we hold. The more robust the stories, the more ethics there are in play. This works in real life too, not just among the rabbits. For example, the civil rights movement was deeply story-bound. It was common practice for the civil rights workers to gather for hours prior to a civil action to sing songs and to tell a larger story, and then to see their work within the context of that larger story. Martin Luther King used to say, "Before you march, meditate upon the life and teachings of Jesus." They were linking their story with another, even larger story. Conversely, the short-lived Occupy movement was intentionally story-bereft. Occupy tended to eschew story in favor of egalitarianism, and rightly a rejection of marginalizing narratives. But they threw the baby out with the bathwater. No narrative, no story meant no community, and the movement diminished to almost disappearance. Occupy did have one story, though, that rang true and has therefore survived. We are the 99%. It's a short story, but for a time it galvanized great swaths of this nation to raise our awareness of the bad ethics of our banking and housing systems, which I guess would indicate that 57% or so that would want to screw the banks over. I was one of them. As the rabbits escape this so-called Utopia, Fiverr, the storyteller, he crafts a tale of this warren, a tragic story, because they have no story. Stories are our best indicator of ethics because they describe our lives, and stories can only survive in a community that can authentically support such stories. All of us, we tell stories. And since we tell stories, we all have ethics expressed in those stories. So what are your ethics? The motto of Creative Mornings is that everyone is creative. Each of us every day is creating something, whether it is a picture, a comic, a sermon, a film, a legal brief, a commercial. Whether we know it or not, we are all telling stories. But actually, I bet all of you knew that. We all tell stories every day, and with our stories, we are making ethical decisions. With everything that we create, we add to the collective ethics of our community. So what is your story? What are your ethics? Each of us creates things for a living or out of passion, but our actual day-to-day lives are the ultimate story and therefore the ultimate ethical statement. You and your work are the protagonist of your story. But you are also the writer, the director, and most importantly, you are the editor of your story. Every editor of an ethical story knows that 3 criteria must be met. The story must be good, true, and beautiful. Good ethics require all 3. You cannot pick 1 or 2. You have to pick all 3. Incorporating the good, the true, and the beautiful, the story must add to the flourishing of humanity. That's good. It must be an accurate description of your life, authentically and vulnerably told. That's true. And finally, when you have tried to put words or images or whatever your medium is, when you've tried to put that to the good and the true, then you will have arrived at beauty. Now, the good, the true, and the beautiful are the ingredients for an ethical story. But how do you go about doing that? Any editor worth her salt would ensure that the writer is the only writer. A good editor would never allow someone to sneak in and write a story without permission. Last month, right here at Creative Mornings, Jess George inspired us to be our own heroes. And I would add to that, my friends, that do not allow anyone to write your story for you. A good editor also needs to make sure to give the protagonist significant obstacles and conflicts to overcome. In your story, whether it is your life or your work, we have to overcome obstacles. Please don't seek the comfortable life. Seek conflict. Seek obstacles to overcome. These obstacles will be different for each of us, but the overcoming of them is the good part of the story. Nobody would have read The Lord of the Rings if Frodo had stayed in his hobbit hole. The Bible would be about 4 pages long had Eve decided not to check out that tree. And what if Dorothy had just decided to let that horrible woman take Toto away? We can edit our lives. Who would watch the movie about the guy who dodged all responsibility in order to work as little as possible? Who would read the novel about the couple who maintained the status quo? There is no interesting story that has no conflict or significant obstacle to encounter. So here's a way that editing conflict and ethics has worked in my life and in the people that I spend a lot of time with. For the last 30 years or so, the Episcopal Church, of which I am a priest, I don't dress this way for fun. This is a sure way to dress to make sure no one talks to you, by the way. There are 2 exceptions in this room. So my church decided about 30 years ago they had the radical notion that gay and lesbian people are indeed fully human and not inherently sinful. This is a radical notion, right? So slowly but surely, our church began to open itself to the insights and lives of gay people, including membership, leadership, and ordination. Finally, after years of prayer and debate, we decided to open marriage to all committed couples. And we did this ahead of North Carolina, by the way, so for a few years we were blessing civil unions, but once North Carolina got wise and the Supreme Court upheld the Constitution, we were in business. Back in October of 2014, when marriage equality was established in North Carolina, I went down to the courthouse to celebrate. I even got called a boiled egg by one of the Bible-thumping protesters. I don't know what that means. Sounds good. But when he called me a boiled egg, I said, that is totally going in my story. My church, St. Martin's, which each and every one of you are invited to, has been protested several times since this decision. And while I think it is awesome to be protested for doing the right thing, it is also very stressful, especially when these men, and they're all men, aren't they? They yell at my parishioners, including the children. It's the right thing. It's the Jesus thing. Jesus, by the way, for us Christians, he is our main writer and editor. Several weeks ago, the worldwide family of churches that the Episcopal Church belongs to, they met. And the leaders of this international family voted to ask us, the Episcopal Church, not to have a vote in theological matters for 3 years. This means because we have expanded the meaning of the sacrament of marriage to all committed couples, that we have departed from tradition. It amounts to a slap on the wrist, but it might be serious in the long run. And several people in my church are very hurt by this, and they see it as unwelcoming and ugly treatment of LGBT people. And they're not wrong. But my thought is that in this world, I want you to hear this. In this world, you cannot establish justice without a consequence. Doing good ethics has consequence. It's going to happen. You cannot do good and just get away with it. But I like my consequence. I like being called a boiled egg. I like getting in trouble with the powers that be. I'm not sure I like wondering if I'm going to be shot when I bless the wedding of a gay couple, which I've done several. But these consequences for living an ethical life are part of the story. They are part of the conflict which gives the story drive. Doing ethics has consequence. So back to the rabbits of Watership Down. As we learn from their adventures, the stories that you both hear and tell do in fact shape the ethics of your life, how you see the world and behave in it. So we might be careful and mindful about the stories that we take in and the stories that we put out, because these stories, both in and out, are making the stories of our lives. And we owe it to each other to increasingly become better, truer, more beautiful versions of ourselves. My friends, we need your ethical stories. Our culture is in a golden age of art, music, and the sharing of ideas and information. But our technology has outpaced our ethics. Help us. Help us with your ethical stories. The creatives are the ones who have won the day. Now use your powers for good and edit your lives and your work into extraordinary stories worth watching. Let's be like that storytelling rabbit, Fiverr, editing our lives to live and tell stories that will spur all of us into adventure. Thank you. Okay, good. We're done. Yes, ma'am.
What do you think the biggest question is, or the biggest challenge is, as far as ethics that we deal with as a generation today?
She asked what's the biggest challenge or for our generation. You're assuming that we are in the same generation. Yeah. Okay. I am 40 years old. Let's see here. The biggest challenge Well, I think the biggest challenge is actually articulating an ethic. Articulating an ethical vision means that you know what you're after, what kind of world you're trying to create. So we have all these different competing stories, right? You know, you have the capitalistic story that says we're going to view each other as commodities to be exchanged, right? You have the whole way the human body is treated in that system. You have Americanism. You know, you have all these different stories. And then there's like these really old stories that some of them are partly ethical and partly not. You know, having just read Beowulf again, I'm not sure we want to get back to that. So I think like articulating a vision and the way articulation is done together. We have to talk about these things and not just be complicit to the prevailing narratives, which are stories, okay? Because people like us who are privileged, when we are silent, we are complicit in the oppressive narratives. Okay?
Would you share with us your first spiritual awakening?
Yeah. I kind of feel like I'm having one right now. This is almost like a pulpit. He asked if I would share my first spiritual awakening. Let's see. I was a junior in high school. I had just purchased a copy of Thich Nhat Hanh's The Miracle of Mindfulness. I was on the beach in Seagrove. This would have been 1992, I think. I read that book. You only have to read like the first 20 pages. And I started to follow my breath and realized that I had been asleep for my entire life up to that moment. And I became very aware of the present moment. And I am forever indebted to that saint who taught me to meditate. That was the first of many. Thank you. There's somebody in the back. Here she comes.
To your point a minute ago about being complicit before silent, I read earlier this week that the state legislature is in the process of removing protections for whistleblowers.
Yeah.
What advice would you have for people moving forward in an environment that might look like that?
Well, we have to use the powers that are given to us by our democracy, right? That was code for vote the bastards out. Who I love very much, because I love everyone. But I will say that this happens a lot in my line of work. One of the acts of love is to tell someone that they're doing something wrong. Okay? So we, again, a great deal of privilege. Are you talking about these things on your social media feeds? In your own office environment, are you setting up a system that circumvents the bad law? So in your own group, set up protections for whistleblowers. You know, I don't know what's going on in this state. It used to be progressive. Okay.
We got time for one more.
Josh, thank you. That was great. What do you make of the survey results that we took for this particular session, including the question about the ATMs, which obviously a majority of people decided.
Right, yeah. You know, like people who study these things have noticed that when there's anonymity, people tend to be unethical. You know, and they tend to be unethical to institutions, or institutions tend to be unethical, right? One of the great ethicists of the 20th century, Reinhold Niebuhr, talked about that, how institutions are fundamentally immoral. And he's even talking about the church, which I would say especially, okay? So the more one-to-one it gets, the more I know you, the more ethical we become. Okay, so I think like part of the growth of an ethical person is that they begin to expand their awareness of their own ethics. So they begin to be not only ethical to their family, but to their community, to their state, to even immoral corporations. So hopefully we would start with ourselves and our loved ones and then expand out as our heart grows ethically. Thank you all, it was fun.
Ladies and gentlemen.